$13 billion warship brought to its knees by a toilet. Not missiles, not enemies, not war. Just a line of sailors waiting to use the bathroom. Right now, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, one of them is making a choice. Sleep or survival. His shift ended 3 hours ago, but his body hasn't recovered. 19 hours awake, eyes burning, muscles heavy, mind fading. All he wants is to lie down. But his body won't let him. He needs to use the bathroom, now. He climbs down 3 narrow ladders, each step echoing through steel. He turns the corner and stops. 15 sailors ahead of him. 45 minutes of waiting. He looks at the line, then back at his rack. 1 hour of sleep, or 1 hour in line. Either way, something is going to break. And here's the part no one tells you about life aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced warship on Earth, can fail in the most basic way imaginable. This isn't a story about war. It's a story about what happens when a perfect system isn't. Out here, in the middle of the ocean, time doesn't move the way it does on land. Days blur into nights, and nights blur into long, quiet shifts under artificial light. On board the USS Gerald R. Ford, nearly 5,000 people live inside a floating steel city. Every hour is scheduled, every movement planned, every mistake amplified. A typical sailor works 12 hours on duty, sometimes more. Sleep comes in fragments, 4 hours here, maybe 5, if they're lucky. And even those few hours are never truly guaranteed. Because life on a carrier isn't just about the mission, it's about endurance. Imagine finishing a long shift, your body completely drained, your mind barely holding on. You have just enough time to sleep before it all starts again. But then your body interrupts the plan. You need to use the bathroom. It sounds simple, almost trivial, until you realize you're not alone. Dozens of sailors are on the same schedule, in the same condition, with the same need. Lines form quickly, stretching down narrow passageways. Waiting becomes part of the routine. Sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes 45, sometimes longer. And in those moments, a strange calculation begins. Do you wait and lose the little sleep you have left? Or do you hold it and hope your body can handle it? Many sailors choose sleep. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's necessary. Over time, that choice comes with consequences. Dehydration, fatigue, loss of focus, and in some cases, real medical issues that follow them long after deployment ends. Now imagine making that choice while responsible for systems that cannot fail. Radar screens, flight operations, reactor controls. The smallest lapse in focus could mean something far bigger than discomfort. This is the part of military life we rarely talk about. Not the action, not the adrenaline, but the quiet, invisible strain that builds up over time. Because even the most advanced warship in the world still depends on something very basic: the human body and its limits. And when those limits are pushed too far, the entire system begins to feel it. So the question isn't just about comfort. It's about how a small, everyday problem can ripple outward into something much bigger. And that's where our story really begins. Because to understand why this happens, we need to look at the system itself. From the outside, it's hard not to be impressed by the sheer scale of the USS Gerald R. It stretches longer than 3 football fields, rising like a floating city of steel and power. On its deck, fighter jets launch into the sky with a force that feels almost unreal. Using electromagnetic catapults, they go from 0 to full speed in just seconds. Beneath that deck, radar systems scan the horizon with precision that borders on science fiction. This ship can project power anywhere on Earth. It can coordinate air operations, track threats, and support missions that shape global events. In every measurable way, it represents the peak of modern military engineering. And yet, there's a problem. Not a missile failure. Not a radar glitch. Something much smaller. Something most of us never think twice about. The ship's toilets. Nearly 500 vacuum-powered toilets, designed to save water and operate efficiently at sea. On paper, it's a brilliant solution. In reality, it's a constant battle. There have been moments when hundreds of toilets failed at the same time. On the USS George H.W. Bush, over 400 units went offline during a single deployment. Imagine nearly 5,000 people sharing a ship without functioning bathrooms. Lines grow longer, tension builds, small frustrations turn into real problems. And sometimes, sailors are forced to improvise in ways they never expected. All of this because a system designed for efficiency becomes fragile under pressure. It's a strange contrast. A machine capable of launching jets at incredible speed, struggling with something as basic as waste management. But this isn't just bad luck or isolated incidents. It's what engineers call a cascading failure. One small blockage leads to pressure buildup. Pressure leads to system imbalance. And suddenly, an entire network stops working. The more complex the system, the more sensitive it becomes to small disruptions. That's the hidden cost of advanced design. Efficiency increases, but resilience sometimes decreases. And when thousands of people depend on that system every day, even a small flaw becomes impossible to ignore. So maybe the real question isn't why the system fails, but why something so small can bring something so powerful to a halt. To answer that, we have to go deeper, beyond the surface, into the science behind it. To understand why this keeps happening, we have to look beyond the surface and into something most people never think about. Not the ship, not the crew, but the science quietly unfolding inside the pipes. Because every time a sailor flushes, a chemical reaction begins. It's invisible, it's silent, and at first, it seems harmless. But over time, it changes everything. The toilets aboard ships like the USS Gerald R don't use fresh water like the ones at home. They use seawater. And seawater is rich in minerals, especially calcium and magnesium. Now add another ingredient, human waste, especially urine. When these elements mix, they don't just flow away. They react. And slowly, they begin to form a solid. A hard, chalky substance that builds up along the inner walls of the pipes. Over weeks and months, that buildup thickens. A 2-inch pipe becomes 1 inch, then less. Flow slows down, pressure increases, and the system starts to struggle. It's not very different from what happens inside the human body. Imagine arteries slowly filling with plaque, restricting the flow of blood. At first, you don't notice anything. But over time, the risk grows. Until one day, something critical fails. And then there's something even worse. Something that doesn't come from chemistry, but from habit. Baby wipes. Unlike toilet paper, they're designed not to break apart in water. They stay intact, strong, and flexible. Inside a vacuum system, that becomes a problem. These wipes travel through the pipes until they catch on rough surfaces. And those surfaces are often coated with mineral buildup. One wipe becomes a net. That net catches more waste, more paper, more debris. And before long, a small obstruction becomes a complete blockage. This is how a system designed for speed and efficiency begins to fail from within. Not because of a single mistake, but because of thousands of small ones repeated every day. A flush here, a wipe there, a build-up no one can see. Until the system has no room left to function. And when that happens, the consequences spread far beyond a single pipe. It affects entire sections of the ship, entire crews, entire operations. So the real problem isn't just what we see on the surface. It's what builds up quietly, over time, in places no one looks. And once it reaches a certain point, fixing it isn't simple anymore. It requires something far more extreme. And people willing to face conditions most would never accept. Because behind every blockage, there's someone who has to go in and fix it. And that's where the story takes us next. When a system like this begins to fail, it doesn't fix itself. Somewhere on the ship, a call goes out. And a small group of sailors gets to work. They are known as hull technicians. On paper, their job sounds technical: welding, repair, damage control. In reality, much of their time is spent somewhere very different. Deep below the decks, far from sunlight, inside the ship's hidden spaces. Where the air is hot, heavy, and difficult to breathe. This is where the system breaks. And this is where they go in. Imagine crawling into a space barely wide enough for your shoulders. Pipes running above you, below you, all around you. Some of them coated with hardened waste and mineral buildup. The smell alone is overwhelming. But the danger goes far beyond discomfort. Decomposing waste releases gases like hydrogen sulfide. At low levels, it smells like rotten eggs. At higher levels, it can be deadly. So these sailors suit up before they enter. Masks, breathing gear, protective gloves, everything needed to survive the environment. And then they begin the work. Feeding a long metal cable into the pipes, inch by inch. Sometimes for hours. Sometimes for an entire shift. And when it's finally done, the system flows again. For a while. Because they know something most people don't. The problem will come back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But it always does. One technician once described it simply. We fix it, and then we wait for it to break again. It's a cycle that never really ends. And yet, they show up every time. Not for recognition, not for glory, but because someone has to do it. And the rest of the crew depends on them. There's a quiet kind of pride in that. A sense of responsibility that doesn't need to be seen to be real. Over time, these sailors build something strong between them. Not just teamwork, but trust. Because in those confined spaces, your safety depends on the person next to you. And sometimes, that trust is all you have. So while others stand on the flight deck, watching jets take off into the sky, these sailors are below, making sure the ship can still function at all. It's not the kind of work people talk about, but it's the kind of work that makes everything else possible. And maybe that's the lesson here. Behind every powerful system, there are people doing the unseen work. Work that isn't glamorous, but absolutely essential. And when that work is overlooked, we forget what really keeps things running. Because in the end, even the most advanced ship in the world depends on them. And that brings us to the final question. If the system keeps failing and the people keep fixing it, why does it never truly get solved? By now, the pattern is clear. The system fails, the crew fixes it, and then it fails again. Over and over, like a loop that never truly ends. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why doesn't it ever get permanently fixed? The answer isn't simple, but it is honest. Because the problem isn't just maintenance. It's design. From the very beginning, the system was built with limits that can't easily be changed. The pipes are narrow, optimized for efficiency and space. The ship itself is densely packed, every inch carefully planned. There is no extra room waiting for upgrades or redesigns. And once the ship is built, those decisions are locked in. You can't just replace the pipes. You can't widen them without tearing the ship apart. And you certainly can't pause operations every time the system struggles. So instead, the Navy adapts. One of the most extreme solutions is something few people ever see. Acid flushing. Industrial-grade chemicals are pumped through the pipes to dissolve the hardened buildup. It's expensive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single operation. And it doesn't last forever. The buildup comes back. The blockages return. And the cycle continues. Reports have shown that this isn't a rare emergency anymore. It's routine. Something that has to be planned for, budgeted for, expected. Over time, the cost adds up, not just in money, but in effort and strain on the crew. And yet, there's no simple fix waiting around the corner. Because the system is working exactly as it was designed to. Efficient, compact, and vulnerable. That's the trade-off. Every engineering decision solves one problem and creates another. In this case, saving water and space came at the cost of long-term reliability. And it's the people on board who live with that decision every day. So what can we learn from all of this? Maybe it's this. No system, no matter how advanced, is ever truly perfect. And the more complex it becomes, the more it depends on the smallest details. The things we overlook, the habits we ignore, the limits we underestimate. Because sometimes it's not the big failures that matter most. It's the small ones that repeat quietly until they can't be ignored anymore. And maybe that's the real story here. Not about a ship, not about a system, but about the people who keep going, even when the system never stops failing. The ones who choose responsibility over comfort. Who show up, fix what they can, and do it all over again the next day. Because in the end, that's what keeps everything moving. Not perfection, but persistence.